the town of New Seabourne. The badge was both shield and sword, protecting the corrupt and crushing the brave. Then Andrea King, a decorated special ops veteran, refused to stay silent. Now she's bloodied in a holding cell, her dog tag shattered outside the precinct, while a ruthless lieutenant scrambles to bury the evidence. But what these crooked cops don't realize is that nothing is more dangerous than a soldier with nothing left to lose. The FBI is closing in, the Pentagon is demanding answers, and one fearless veteran's wrongful arrest is about to topple the entire system. Before we dive deeper, let me know where you're tuning in from, and if you crave more stories like this, subscribe now, because tomorrow's special episode is one you won't want to miss. It was late afternoon in the coastal town of New Seabourne, and everyone seemed to know the invisible rules set in place by the people who wielded power. Keep your head down, don't ask questions, and never, ever threaten the delicate balance of control the authorities had established. For generations, the local police department had functioned both as a shield to protect and a blade to pierce, selectively choosing whose lives to safeguard and whose to destroy. Most residents understood, albeit reluctantly, that stepping out of line or even appearing suspicious could invite retribution swifter and more ruthless than any criminal gang. Yet for Andrea King, a decorated female Army veteran in her mid-40s, homecomings shouldn't have come wrapped in fear and unspoken warnings. She had expected a quiet reintegration into civilian life after 2 decades of active service, her hair now streaked with silver that bore witness to the passing years and the hardships she'd seen overseas. She had served in multiple conflicts, leading reconnaissance missions and humanitarian efforts that saved lives on distant shores. To her, returning to New Seabourne meant finally finding peace in the place she'd grown up, soaking in the briny air and reminding herself that not every fight involved bullets. She arrived home with a limp in her left leg, courtesy of a shrapnel injury from her final deployment. Though the limp left her slower physically, her mind was as sharp as ever, her instincts honed by countless high-stakes operations. She wore her service dog tags proudly around her neck. Those tags had become an unspoken promise to herself that no matter the hardship, she would never stop standing up for what was right. No one imagined that this same town, tucked between rolling hills and the ocean's edge, would soon test both her strength and her faith in the very institutions she once believed in. As twilight descended, Andrea parked her dusty SUV along the curb outside the modest seaside cottage she'd inherited from her late aunt. The cottage was unassuming, with a squeaky fence gate and a tiny porch that smelled of paint thinner and the remnants of salt carried in from the ocean breeze. She drew in a deep breath, that faint tang of seaweed and distant tide pools, letting the scent calm her. For a moment, memories of war zones and stifling desert heat receded. A new life beckoned. But peaceful moments have a habit of ending abruptly when darkness conceals men with dark intentions. Even as she slid her key into the lock, her peripheral vision registered the reflection of flashing lights somewhere down the road. A patrol car rolled along, moving slowly, as though taking inventory of who dared to stand outside so late in the evening. The beam of its headlights illuminated Andrea for a split second, a jarring spotlight that sent a chill through her. She wondered if they recognized her, or if her presence was already considered a potential threat, just another new face returning after years away. She shrugged off the feeling, telling herself it was just paranoia. Yet that night she slept fitfully, repeatedly waking to the hum of a car engine idling near her home. Each time she peered out, she caught a fleeting glimpse of headlights before they vanished. After the third incident, she laughed humorlessly into the darkness. "Maybe I've been overseas too long," she muttered, jumping at every shadow. She pressed a hand to her dog tags, taking solace in the small piece of metal that had accompanied her through so many life-threatening missions. She didn't know that her quiet return to New Seabourne had already been noted by those who considered themselves guardians of judges of order. Morning brought a hopeful sun. Andrea rose early, ignoring the dull ache in her leg, determined to reacquaint herself with the town she had left decades ago. She had made a vow to herself to get back into a steady exercise routine. If running had once been her daily ritual in the military, It could serve again to clear her mind. So, with her hair tied back and her dog tags tucked beneath her t-shirt, she set out from her cottage, inhaling the crisp ocean air that seemed to sharpen her senses. The streets were nearly empty, except for a few older residents walking their dogs and a street sweeper tending to scattered debris. Andrea walked at first, warming up her muscles, nodding politely to a gray-hailed woman who smiled in acknowledgement. Then she pushed into a slow jog, ignoring the twinge in her left knee. The rhythmic impact of each step provided a familiar sense of grounding. She needed this, an anchor to the simpler parts of life, a small victory over the anxiety that had followed her home. She reached the main thoroughfare that snaked along the coastline, lined with fishing shacks, a few quaint diners, and a small maritime museum with chipped paint on the wooden signs. She spotted a local diner named Louise's Kitchen, a place she recalled from childhood as having the best clam chowder in town. She planned to revisit it later, maybe treat herself to an old favorite. For now, she turned inland toward a quiet park, the centerpiece of which was a towering statue commemorating local veterans. She'd heard about this statue, but had never seen it. As she approached, her pace slowed. There it stood, bronze against the morning light, depicting a soldier with a rifle slung over one shoulder and a medic kit at his feet, a testament to those from New Seabourne who had served. At the statue's base was a plaque listing names of the fallen. She felt a tightening in her chest reading them, recognizing a few family names from old neighbors. She placed a hand gently on the bronze surface, letting her breathing steady. This was supposed to be a reminder of communal respect for those who had given everything, a silent vow that the town would honor its service members. She reflected with grim irony that not everything was as honorable as this statue suggested. A scraping sound behind her interrupted her thoughts. Turning, she saw a police cruiser parked near the curb, half shielded by oak trees. Two officers stood by the trunk, eyeing her with the kind of lingering scrutiny she'd seen so often overseas when suspicious guards watched civilians approach a checkpoint. Despite herself, she felt the old adrenaline flicker in her veins. She had encountered scrutiny before, on foreign streets by armed men who assumed she was dangerous simply because she was different. She never expected the same vigilance on her home soil. Calmly, she raised a hand in greeting, but the officers did not wave back. One rested his hand on his belt, near his holster. Andrea decided to walk away before any confrontation. She reminded herself that not every officer was out to intimidate. This was likely routine patrol. Yet as she left the park, she felt that familiar prickling on the back of her neck. If anything, she knew how to read people. Something was off. She wasn't sure how deep the rot went, but she couldn't shake the sense that the local department had become an occupying force rather than a community's safeguard. She jogged home at a quicker pace than intended, ignoring the protest from her old injury, every muscle tense with unresolved unease. Arriving at her cottage, she noticed a small note pinned to her front door with a pushpin. Her name was scrawled across it. Heart-pounding, she pried it free. The note contained just 5 words. "We know who you are." Her breath caught in her throat, and for a heartbeat she feared it might be some retaliatory message from an old enemy. But that made no sense. She was thousands of miles from any war zone. Could it be from local troublemakers? An ex from her younger days? The simplicity of the words left them open to countless interpretations, but the tone was disturbingly clear. It was a warning, and it was linked to the flickering headlights at night, the lingering stares from patrolling officers, the hush-hush rumors about this place. Far from quelling her resolve, the threat fueled a spark of defiance in Andrea. She took the note inside, locked her door behind her, and studied it under the lamp in her small living room. The handwriting was firm, purposeful, probably an adult man if she had to guess. She had done her share of intelligence gathering in her time, analyzing scrawled notes from local warlords or reading coded letters from hostile forces. This gave her a similar chill. "So that's how you greet a veteran who's trying to resettle," she murmured to no one. "Fine. I've dealt with scarier bullies than you." She folded the note, placed it in a small lockbox along with her army commendations, and exhaled a shaky breath. She refused to let intimidation run her life. Within the week, another sign of trouble emerged. One afternoon, Andrea decided it was time to refuel her SUV. The solitary gas station near the outskirts of New Seabourne offered the cheapest prices in the area. She pulled in, noticing that the station was nearly deserted, save for a lone teen behind the counter in the convenience store and an older couple in a battered pickup. As she parked near a pump, a local squad car zipped into the lot, its presence immediately setting her on edge. She got out, swiped her credit card, and began pumping gas, trying to appear casual. But the policeman in the cruiser was staring at her intently. He was a tall figure, late 50s maybe, with a gray mustache and a gaze that didn't bother with cordiality. She recognized the name on his badge, Colleran. She had heard that name once or twice from neighbors, whispered stories suggesting he was one of the lieutenants under the police chief, a man rumored to make life miserable for anyone who questioned his authority. When the gas nozzle clicked, she replaced it and decided to go inside for a soda. She could feel Colleran's eyes on her back, as though assessing if she'd present any reason for a routine check. The moment she stepped into the convenience store, the teen, wearing a hoodie and shaking hands, muttered a greeting. She flashed him a small, reassuring smile, sensing his nerves might have something to do with the officer outside. While browsing the beverage coolers, a shout from outside jerked her attention away. She peered through the windows to see Colleran confronting an elderly man who just stepped out of the battered pickup. The man looked stunned, holding up his hands in placation. Colleran's voice carried through the glass. "I told you folks to stay away. Didn't I say that? You want to keep ignoring me, you'll find yourself locked up." Andrea frowned. It was a bizarre scene. The old man was trembling, trying to speak. She couldn't make out the words, only the defeat in his stance. She glanced at the teen behind the register. He'd frozen in place, eyes wide. "Does that happen often?" Andrea asked quietly. The teen didn't answer, but the fear in his expression spoke volumes. She realized Colleran was one of those brazen types who believed power was his birthright. She'd known men like him. In war zones, they wore uniforms or carried rifles and had no qualms about abusing their position. Andrea's gut told her to stay out of it, not to escalate, especially since she was new in town and still wary about the note pinned to her door. But the flicker of her dog tags beneath her shirt reminded her of all the times she had intervened for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. She set down her soda and walked back outside. At that moment, Colleran was checking the old man's ID, scrutinizing it as though searching for a forgery. The older gentleman looked humiliated, but there was a glimmer of relief in his eyes when Andrea approached, as though seeing any potential ally. "Everything all right here, officer?" Andrea asked in her calmest tone, forcing a polite smile. She remembered that in tense situations you could sometimes diffuse hostility by projecting steady self-control. Colleran turned, sweeping his cold gaze over Andrea's figure, from her well-worn running shoes up to her face. "Move along, citizen," he said harshly. "None of your business." The old man opened his mouth as if to speak, but Colleran silenced him with a sharp glare. Andrea exhaled slowly. "I'm sorry if I'm interrupting something. It just looked like he might need assistance." "I said move along," the officer repeated, voice harder. He took a step closer, letting one hand rest on the butt of his holstered gun. "Or do you want to find yourself on the ground?" She let the threat sink in. She had encountered arrogance on the battlefield, and it never failed to spark her protective instincts. But she was on U.S. soil now, not in some foreign war. She had to be cautious. "I'm just making sure everything's okay, officer. I don't want any trouble." "Then you should mind your own business," Colleran snapped. He thrust the old man's ID back at him. "Get in your truck and drive away. Don't come back here." The old man clutched his ID, relief and shame mingling on his features, before he climbed back into his pickup, started the engine, and left without another word. Andrea stood rooted to the spot, fists tight at her sides. Colleran's eyes narrowed at her. "Think you're tough because you served, huh?" he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Saw your license plate? Special Army plates? That doesn't mean you run things here. This is my town. You'd be wise to remember that. A chill raced down Andrea's spine. That single remark, my town, told her exactly what she was dealing with. A policeman who believed the streets belonged to him like a personal fiefdom. She forced herself to speak gently, though she wanted to unleash a string of words that might land her in jail for contempt. I'm not trying to run anything, I'm just a resident. My name is Andrea King. She paused, considering whether to offer her hand. But the tension in Colleran's posture told her he wasn't interested in civility. He snorted as though her name was irrelevant. Let me give you a word of advice, Miss King. People who poke their nose in places they don't belong end up regretting it. He stepped closer, close enough for her to smell the faint odor of stale coffee on his breath. You served overseas. Good for you. But that means nothing here. You're just another citizen under the watch of the new Seabourne Police Department, and we don't take kindly to hero acts. Andrea's heart hammered, but she maintained a calm facade. She recognized intimidation tactics. She'd survived far worse. Still, caution told her to de-escalate. I understand, she murmured, stepping back. I hope you have a good day, officer. Colleran gave a humorless chuckle. I will. You, on the other hand, might want to watch yourself. With that parting shot, he climbed back into his cruiser and drove off, leaving her standing there with the echo of his threat ringing in her ears. She let out a long, shaky breath. This was not how she had imagined life back in her hometown. It was as if someone had replaced the idyll of New Seabourne with the sinister version of reality, warped. In her memory, the police were folks who helped fix a child's broken bike chain or escorted a lost dog back to its owner. She never expected to see an officer treat an elderly man like a criminal for no discernible reason, or to be threatened for simply asking if assistance was needed. Shaken, Andrea re-entered the convenience store. The teen behind the counter looked up, eyes wide. That was intense, he whispered. He's never liked me hanging around here alone either. Says I look shifty, but I need the job. Andrea's chest constricted. That single word, shifty, carried the weight of Colleran's prejudice. The teen was likely only 16 or 17, trying to earn a bit of money, not hurting anyone. I'm sorry you have to deal with that, Andrea said softly, rummaging for some cash to pay for a bottle of water. Stay safe, okay? He nodded, looking uncertain. As she walked out, she glanced around, half expecting Colleran to have doubled back. But the coast was clear. She swallowed, then drove away, her thoughts swirling, question after question surfacing. Why were these officers so brazen about intimidation? Was this just a personal vendetta or something systematically ingrained within the department? That evening, she mulled it over in her living room, the TV tuned to a local news channel that was cycling through mundane stories. A fundraiser, a new library wing, minor robberies. No mention of random harassment at the gas station. No mention of the police force or potential misuse of power. The glaring absence of such stories made her suspect that local media might be reluctant or outright scared to talk about it. Then, as though fate were done with subtlety, her phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. We saw what happened. You're not alone. For a split second, she felt her stomach plummet. Was this another threat? But then she read further. A second message followed. Some of us have been documenting police misconduct. You want to help? Her mind spun. Who was behind this? A group of concerned citizens? An underground network fighting police corruption? She typed a hesitant response. Who are you? A minute passed. An agonizingly long minute before the reply came. No names yet, safer that way. The important part is that we've got evidence. We just need more to expose everything. Evidence, proof. Her training told her that no matter how righteous a cause, if you lacked proof, all you had were accusations. She thought of Colleran's threat, the note pinned to her door, the old man's terrified expression. Without evidence, they would all be dismissed as hearsay. But this text implied there were people out there willing to take risks. She typed back, All right, let me know how I can help. No reply came immediately. She sat on her couch, phone in hand, staring at the screen until the news looped to weather and the local anchors joked about weekend sunshine. Her mind was too restless to relax. She had half a mind to contact her longtime friend Sam Bowers, who was now a local journalist. They'd grown up together, parted ways when Andrea enlisted, and reconnected sporadically over social media. But Sam had always seemed unimpressed by the local government, frequently complaining about their secrecy. If anyone was forging connections with these whistleblowers, it could be Sam. She decided to dial him. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered, warm with an undercurrent of curiosity. "Andrea? It's been ages. Everything okay?" She swallowed, not certain how much to reveal yet. "Sam, hi. I'm back in town. Long story. Listen, do you know anything about our local police being, well, overly aggressive?" She tried to sound casual, but her voice shook slightly. A pause. Then Sam sighed. "I do, but I can't get a single person to talk on record. It's like everyone is petrified." Andrea nodded, even though Sam couldn't see her. "I've run into a few incidents. Something's off. I've been threatened, others have too. A group reached out via text claiming they have evidence of misconduct." Sam exhaled, relief and caution weaving together in his tone. "So there really is something out there. People talk to me in whispers, but the moment I say, 'record,' they clam up. Look, Andrea, I'm working on an investigative piece, but I'm hitting walls, hard walls. If you can connect me with whoever reached out to you, that might change everything." She considered. "I don't even know who they are. They won't give me names, but maybe if they trust me I can bring you in. Just be careful. We both know how this town operates these days." Sam gave a humorless chuckle. "Trust me, I've had a few run-ins. They already tried scaring me off, sent me an anonymous letter telling me to keep my nose out of local matters, but I'm not about to let it slide." He hesitated. "I've been meaning to ask, you served for so long, are you prepared for a different kind of war here?" Andrea's hand drifted to her dog tags. She squeezed them for reassurance. "I've been preparing for it all my life. If local tyranny thinks it can cower me, it's in for a rude awakening." They agreed to keep each other in the loop. After the call ended, Andrea paced around her small living room, trying to quell the nervous energy that flared every time she thought about how quickly her new life at home had become tangled in threats and secrecy. She forced herself to recall her training. Gather facts, remain patient, be systematic. You don't rush into a confrontation without intelligence on the enemy's positions. She'd seen enough brash moves in war zones to know they rarely end well. The unknown group texted her again that night, instructing her to meet in a discreet location near the old marina at midnight in 3 days' time if she wanted to see something that would confirm her suspicions. The invitation was cryptic, making her spine tingle with equal parts fear and excitement. She typed a simple acknowledgement. "I'll be there." The next days passed like slow-turning gears, each moment marked by subtle intimidation. A pair of officers parked outside her cottage one afternoon, eating lunch in their cruiser, but clearly aiming their stares at her windows. Another time her mailbox was left hanging open, as though someone had rummaged through her envelopes. On the second morning she found a crumpled pamphlet on her lawn, titled "Respect Law Enforcement or Else," though it bore no official insignia. The entire situation felt like a twisted cat-and-mouse game, but Andrea was no helpless mouse. Each act of intimidation only steeled her determination. She documented everything, snapping photos with her phone and jotting notes in a small notepad. She'd learned in the army that meticulous records could turn the tide in any investigation. If these bullies wanted to silence her, she would answer by growing even louder. At last the designated night arrived. A cool breeze swept in from the ocean, and the moon was a sliver in an overcast sky, rendering the streets gloomier than usual. She wore dark clothes, slipped her phone into her pocket, and quietly exited her cottage under the cover of midnight. The old marina was a relic from better days, long before the city built a modern harbor. Now it was a series of dilapidated wooden docks rotting in the salt air. used only by local fishers unwilling to pay the higher fees at the main harbor. At this hour it was deserted. She felt the boards of the old dock creak under her careful steps. A single flickering lamppost provided weak illumination. She waited, scanning the darkness, her breath shallow. Years of operating in war zones had ingrained in her a nearly uncanny night vision and heightened awareness. Part of her worried this was a trap. Another part felt an odd sense of purpose. If she wanted to bring justice to those being victimized, these were the steps she had to take. A soft shuffle of footsteps reached her ears, and she turned swiftly. Two figures emerged from behind a stack of old lobster traps. One was short and thin, wearing a hooded sweatshirt. The other was taller, with an inconspicuous baseball cap pulled low. Their faces remained hidden by shadows. Andrea tensed, but something about their posture felt anxious rather than aggressive. "You came," the shorter figure whispered. The voice was that of a woman, older than a teen, though Andrea couldn't identify an exact age. "We weren't sure if you would." Andrea nodded. "I'm here. You said you had evidence?" The taller figure produced a small USB flash drive from a jacket pocket and held it out. Videos, recordings, officers beating suspects, threatening families, planting evidence. "We have more, but this is the tip of the iceberg. We want it to go public, but local media is terrified, and the national outlets haven't paid attention yet." Andrea's stomach knotted at the mention of beatings and planted evidence. "You filmed this yourselves?" "Yes. Some of it is from hidden cameras. Some is from an officer who couldn't stomach it anymore. They tried to wipe data from the official body cams, but we salvaged fragments," the woman figure said in a hushed rush. Andrea reached out, hesitating a moment before taking the flash drive. "I can get this to Sam Bowers, a journalist friend. He'll know how to handle it." The taller figure shifted uneasily. "You have to be careful. The department is bigger than just a few bad cops. Chief Brolin and Lieutenant Colleran run it like a private kingdom. They've got city council members in their pocket, plus the local judge who signs off on warrants for questionable raids. If they get wind that you have this, they'll stop at nothing to destroy it. And you." "I've faced worse threats," Andrea said with a determined edge. "Who are you two, really?" The woman lifted her hood slightly, revealing a face that Andrea recognized from around town. Linda Poe, who ran the local community center. Linda was known for her no-nonsense approach in helping disadvantaged kids. "I'm not scared for myself," Linda said. "I'm worried about the kids. If they're seen near me, the cops target them for random checks. I've had enough. People come to me with stories, and I've helped gather them. But we need someone with your nerve to push it forward." Andrea nodded, heart pounding. She turned to the taller figure, but he remained concealed. "It's better for all of us if I don't say my name," he muttered apologetically. His voice, however, sounded vaguely familiar. "Just trust that I serve on the inside." "I've seen more than I can stomach." She let it go. "I'll keep this safe, thank you. But what else can we do? Just handing it to a journalist might not be enough. These folks hold the strings locally." Linda nodded vigorously. "We might need external support. The FBI, Department of Justice, civil rights groups. We'll need a massive public outcry to force them to step in. We're hoping you can help coordinate that with your connections." A memory flared in Andrea's mind. An old friend from her unit who now worked in a federal capacity, investigating corruption in local municipalities. "I do know some people who might help," she said. "But first, I'll get these files to Sam. We'll strategize from there. If this evidence is as damning as you say, we can ignite a fire that not even Chief Brolin can quench." "Just be careful," Linda repeated. "Colleran has no scruples. He's orchestrated cover-ups, forced confessions, you name it. The moment you become a threat, they'll move to silence you." Andrea's mind immediately jumped to the threatening note pinned to her door. So that's how they operate, sowing fear like seeds in a garden. She tucked the flash drive securely into a hidden pocket inside her jacket. "I will, and thank you, Linda, both of you. We'll protect this evidence. You have my word." They parted ways in that murky half-light of the marina, moving like ghosts among the old docks. Andrea's heart hammered, a mixture of adrenaline and righteous fury coursing through her. So it was all real, and possibly even worse than she'd feared. The question was, how far were these corrupt authorities willing to go? She reached home without incident, though her eyes scanned the streets at every turn, paranoid about a cruiser tailing her. She locked the door, drew the curtains, and finally let out a shaky breath. She plugged the USB into her laptop and waited, feeling as though she were unwrapping a box of snakes. If Linda and the anonymous officer had risked this, it had to be explosive. The folder contained multiple videos. Some were shaky cell phone recordings of nighttime traffic stops, where officers roughed up drivers, barking slurs and threats. Others showed dusty, basement-like holding areas, presumably inside the police station, with unidentified detainees sobbing or pleading, and an officer's voice off-camera telling them to shut up or face the consequences. Andrea's stomach churned as she watched clip after clip of police shining flashlights in quivering faces, pushing people into walls or rifling through cars with no apparent cause. Many of the victims looked like older folks, teens or low-income residents. Some wore battered clothes. Others looked like they had come straight from a shift at the local cannery. The level of violence and intimidation was staggering. Then came a final video labeled Inside Dep. It showed a room resembling a small office. A uniformed man, face partially turned away, grumbled about targets and planting contraband so that quotas could be met. Another voice off-screen laughed, referencing orders from Brolin. Andrea paused, heart pounding. This was the smoking gun linking the chief of police to orchestrated corruption. Another voice joined in, sounding eerily like Colleran, complaining about no-see citizens who think they're above the law. Andrea nearly threw up from a combination of disgust and fury. She ejected the flash drive, feeling her hands tremble. This was no mere rumor, it was systematic oppression, a machine devouring the innocent, fed by the power-hungry. She recalled her oath when she enlisted, to protect the Constitution and the citizens of her country from all enemies, foreign and domestic. Domestically was not a concept she'd imagined applying to small-town America, but here it was. She texted Sam Bowers immediately. "I have something big. Need to see you ASAP." He responded within seconds. "Tomorrow morning at my office, 8 a.m. That night she barely slept, every creak of the cottage's wooden frame making her jump. The thought of what could happen if the police found out she possessed these videos kept her alert. If Colleran had threatened her so casually over a mild confrontation, what would he do if he discovered she held the proof that could topple the entire department? Come dawn, Andrea headed to Sam's office. The building was an older brick structure downtown, housing a small local paper called the Seabourne Gazette. Sam rented one of the upstairs rooms as a personal workspace for deeper investigations. She climbed the steps slowly, mindful of her leg. Sam ushered her in, locking the door behind them. She handed him the USB, her voice barely above a whisper. "This will blow open everything. But we have to be strategic. They'll try to bury us if we go off half-cocked." Sam plugged the drive into his computer, jaw tightening as he watched the first few clips. By the time he reached the final segment, he looked downright sick. "This is... Holy God, Andrea! This could bring in the feds, judge, city council, maybe the mayor. They're all implicated if they let this go on." She nodded gravely. "We can't rely solely on local authorities. We need an outside agency, yes. The FBI, or maybe the state attorney general. We should also consider that some in-state government might be compromised. But it's a start." Sam rubbed his temples, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "It'll take me time to compile a watertight story with cross-verification. If I just publish these videos, the department's lawyers will argue they're fabricated or out of context. I need witness statements, documentation, and ideally a whistleblower from inside." Andrea thought of the unnamed man at the marina. One officer is feeding this info. If we can coax him to come forward, that'd be huge, but we need to protect him. The moment he's identified, they'll label him a traitor. Sam leaned back, exhaling shakily. "I'll contact a few people I trust, maybe a civil rights attorney from the city. We'll push this story out to bigger outlets once we have the framework. Meanwhile, you watch your back. We'll need some place safe to store backups of these files. The second they suspect we have them, they'll come for them." Andrea patted her jacket, revealing she had multiple flash drives. "I've made copies. I'll stash them in different places. I'm not risking losing it all in one go." Impressed, Sam gave a slight nod of approval. "Always prepared, soldier. Good. I'll keep you updated. And Andrea, thank you for taking this on. Not many people would have the guts to stand up to these guys," she offered a half smile. "After what I've faced overseas, I'll be damned if I let fear shut me down here. This is my home now. I'm not ceding it to bullies." When she left Sam's office, a prickle of apprehension trailed her. She felt as though unseen eyes were watching from every corner, waiting for a misstep. She decided to lay low for the rest of the day, only leaving her cottage to buy groceries, avoiding direct eye contact with the patrol cars that crawled the streets. Her mind replayed Collaren's scowl, the old man's terror, the battered faces in those videos. She realized something horrifying. Many of those battered faces had never made headlines, never filed complaints, or if they had, they must have vanished from the record. That evening, as she tried to read an old mystery novel to calm her nerves, her phone buzzed. A text from Sam. "They must have found out. My landlord called, said the police want to search my office for unrelated matters. I'm grabbing everything I can right now." Her blood turned cold. She typed back, "I'm coming to help." He responded, "No, don't. If they see you, they'll tie it together. I'll hide the evidence. You stay safe." Andrea cursed under her breath. She loathed inaction, but Sam was right. She glanced at the copies of the flash drive in her possession, hidden in a lockbox. If the cops raided Sam's place, they'd be looking for anything suspicious, hopefully ignorant of the fact that the real trove was secured elsewhere. She could only hope Sam was quick enough to stash what he needed. If they found the original USB, that might be enough to sabotage the entire plan. Night fell, thick and oppressive, like the hush before a storm. She triple-checked her doors and windows, fear twisting her stomach. She tried to watch mindless TV, but her thoughts circled back to the same question. How soon until Collaren or Chief Brolin realized she was the pivot point for this evidence? By midnight, she dozed off on the couch, only to wake with a start at a rattling sound near her front porch. She jumped up, heart pounding. A silhouette passed her window and she froze, adrenaline surging. She moved to flick on the porch light. In the harsh glow, she saw someone dart off into the darkness, leaving behind a small object on her doorstep. Cautiously, she waited, half expecting a gunshot or a crashing window. When the silhouette vanished, she opened the door just enough to peer outside. Lying on the weathered boards was a single black glove, a bullet nestled in its palm. Her breath caught. It was a message. They were warning her that a bullet could follow, that next time it might not be such a symbolic drop. Fear coiled in her belly, but so did fury. She picked up the glove and bullet, her hand trembling. Enough was enough. She placed them inside next to that earlier threatening note. Evidence of intimidation. She spent the rest of the night wide-eyed, dog tags cool against her chest, considering what it might cost to see this through. But as an old saying she'd heard overseas often went, "It is better to die on your feet than live on your knees." She refused to kneel. At dawn, her phone buzzed with a call. It was Linda Poe's voice, cracking with alarm. "Andrea, something bad happened last night. One of the older residents was found beaten in an alley downtown. People say he was seen speaking out against Collaren at a community meeting. They're calling it a mugging, but no one believes that. The cops barely investigated. It's sending shockwaves." Andrea pressed her free hand to her forehead. Another victim, another scare tactic to silence people. "Is he alive?" "Barely. They rushed him to the hospital. People are frightened, Andrea. Some are murmuring about leaving town. We can't let them chase us out. Please, do something." Andrea swallowed the lump in her throat. "I'm not giving up. Keep me posted on his condition. And tell folks not to lose hope. We're close to exposing all of this." She paused. Maybe start collecting personal statements from people who trust you while we get our plan in place with Sam. Linda whispered a trembling thank you and ended the call. 2 hours later, Sam rang with an update. He'd managed to hide his data drives in a safe location before the cops arrived at his office. They searched the place under the guise of investigating illicit materials, but fortunately found nothing. "They're pressing me, though," Sam said grimly. "Warned me that if I keep stirring the pot, they'll haul me in for questioning. The only reason they haven't is because they know it'll be too suspicious. They're hoping intimidation is enough. I have an appointment with a civil rights lawyer this afternoon. I'll show them the footage. We'll see if we can expedite involvement from the state or feds." Andrea felt a spark of relief. "That's good. We need an official channel. Linda said another man was attacked last night, likely a retaliation for speaking out. They're escalating." Sam sighed. "I know. That's exactly why we can't back down. We'll hold them accountable. Get ready, Andrea. This will get worse before it gets better." Despite her bravado, Andrea was unsettled by the notion that this will get worse. She tried to focus on practicalities. She updated her hidden stash of digital backups, made sure to leave a copy with a trusted friend in a neighboring city just in case. That friend knew to send everything to national news outlets if Andrea went missing. Paranoia? Maybe. But after what she'd witnessed overseas, it felt more like caution. Days passed with tension crackling through the air. Sam's lawyer was a fierce middle-aged woman named Carla Monroe, who specialized in civil rights litigation. Carla took one look at the evidence and declared that it was enough to begin formal legal proceedings. Though she admitted it would be an uphill battle, she started contacting the Department of Justice. Meanwhile, Sam wrote a draft article summarizing key points, without revealing the whistleblower's identity. The plan was to release it online once certain legal safeguards were in place. Andrea sensed the clamp tightening around her. Patrol cars were a constant presence on her street, sometimes slowing to shine a spotlight on her house late at night. Her tires were slashed once, forcing her to pay for replacements. She didn't even bother reporting it. She knew the local cops would do nothing or twist it around. She took photos for her personal record instead. One night, Linda texted, urging Andrea to attend a small community gathering at the local church basement. Residents were meeting to discuss how to protect themselves and share stories. Andrea was reluctant. What if it was raided? But Linda insisted they needed her. So she went. Dog tags hidden under a sweater, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. About 20 people were there, ranging from seniors to a handful of younger adults. She recognized the teen from the gas station, huddled next to his mother, looking terrified. One by one, people recounted their run-ins with the police. False DUI charges, random searches of their homes, lost jobs when the department blacklisted them. Andrea listened, heart heavy, realizing this was a systematic plague that had festered for years because no one dared speak up, or if they did, they were swiftly silenced. When Andrea finally spoke, her voice trembled at first but gained strength as she went on. She explained that she'd served her country to defend exactly these rights: fair treatment, due process, freedom from tyranny. Seeing them trampled by local authorities was intolerable. She told them about the plan with Sam and Carla, about the evidence that would soon be public. Several people asked if that might spark immediate retaliation from the police. Andrea was honest. They might lash out, but once the story spreads nationally, they can't hide. If we stand firm together, they can't pick us off one by one. A few in the audience teared up, relief finally surfacing that someone was doing something tangible. Others looked fearful but nodded in agreement. "We've got your back," an older woman said. "We're not running, this is our home." Andrea left that meeting filled with a mix of hope and dread. Hope that the community was no longer cowed. Dread, knowing Colleran and the chief wouldn't stand by idly. In a whispered aside, Linda mentioned a rumor that the chief was planning a sweep of criminal elements next week, an excuse to arrest anyone they labeled a troublemaker. Andrea suspected it was a scare tactic to root out the activists. She told Linda to spread the word, to stay calm, not to resist physically, but to contact the lawyer if arrested. They were dealing with an institution trained to spin narratives to their advantage. Sure enough, the sweep rumor materialized into real action. Over the course of a single day, officers carried out raids on a handful of homes, confiscating personal property under vague pretenses like suspected drug activity. The detainees were largely people who'd attended the church meeting. Andrea's phone lit up with frantic calls. She and Sam scrambled to notify Carla, but the local judge, likely in the chief's pocket, signed every warrant the police requested. By the end of the day, over a dozen residents were behind bars or being held for questioning, and the entire town reeled under a wave of intimidation. Andrea debated stepping in physically, but rationally she knew confronting an entire police force was suicide. Instead, she doubled down on documentation. People gave statements about how their doors were kicked in. She even caught a partial raid on video from her car while passing by. She forwarded everything to Carla. That night, Sam finalized his article. The headline read, "Evidence of Systemic Police Corruption in New Seabourne, a Town in Crisis." He included screenshots from the videos, carefully blurred to protect identities, along with quotes from anonymous witnesses. Just as he was about to hit publish, Carla called to say the Department of Justice had responded to her initial inquiry, indicating potential involvement. "Hold on a beat," she warned Sam. "If they move in to investigate, we can coordinate the release for maximum impact. If you publish too soon, the local department might destroy more evidence or do something drastic." Sam hesitated, then agreed. He turned to Andrea. "We might have to wait a few days. I know how precarious this is, but we need to line up the federal authorities properly." Andrea suppressed the urge to scream. Meanwhile, people were rotting in the local jail, facing who knew what. But she recognized Carla's logic. A synchronized release could bring immediate scrutiny, preventing the department from burying evidence. "Fine," she said, though it felt like swallowing barbed wire, but not too long. "They're playing rough." Those next few days were a crucible of anxiety for everyone. Andrea tried to keep a low profile, but on the third morning, a battered old sedan pulled up to her cottage. Out stepped a weary-looking man in a rumpled jacket. He knocked on her door with an air of desperate resolve. She opened cautiously, unsure if this might be another trap. "Andrea King?" he asked in a hoarse whisper. I work with them, the police, but I can't do it anymore." His eyes darted around, sweat beading on his forehead. "They suspect I leaked info. I need your help." Her heart thudded. This had to be the whistleblower. She stepped aside, letting him enter. He introduced himself as Officer Marcus Henry. Shutting the door behind them, she locked it. "You're the one who passed the videos to Linda and your other contact?" she ventured. He nodded, trembling. "Yes, they're on to me. I heard them talking about setting me up, claiming I was dirty. I can't stay silent. Colleran beat a suspect last week. I saw it. I tried to intervene. Now he knows I'm not on board with their games. Please, you have to help me come forward safely." Andrea took a moment to steady herself. Having an active officer as a witness would be gold for their case, but she saw the terror in his eyes. "We have a lawyer. Carla Monroe. She can arrange protective measures, maybe witness protection if it comes to that. The Department of Justice might put you under federal protection once the story goes national." Henry nodded frantically. "I'll do whatever it takes. I have a family, though, 2 kids. I need them safe." Andrea exhaled slowly. The stakes soared higher by the minute. "We'll figure it out. For now, stay here." She made a call to Carla, explaining the situation, and Carla told them to come to her office immediately. She also told them not to trust local authorities, obviously. The department would brand Henry a traitor the moment they realized he had turned. Henry was shaking as he waited in Andrea's living room, staring at her collection of service awards on a shelf. "You've seen combat. Probably some real horrors, right?" he asked quietly. She nodded, remembering dusty roads and nights pinned under gunfire in foreign lands. "Yes, I have. But it's different seeing it here at home. Hurts worse in some ways." He gave a shaky laugh that held no humor. "I joined the force to make a difference, you know. but from the inside it was a nightmare. Colleran demands loyalty, the chief sets impossible quotas, they keep feeding us lines about how criminals are everywhere, but a lot of it is just families, people who can't fight back. Her eyes softened and she placed a hand on his shoulder. You're doing the right thing now. That's what matters. They left together in her SUV, hearts pounding. She avoided main roads, took side streets. She noticed a squad car trailing them at one point, but she managed to lose it by weaving through back alleys. Eventually, they parked behind Carla's law office, a nondescript building with tinted windows. Sam was there too, pacing in the hallway. When Andrea and Henry arrived, he nodded with grim determination. Ready? Carla ushered them into a small conference room. After they locked the door, Henry spilled everything. He described how the chief had formed a tight circle of trusted enforcers, Colleran at the helm, who systematically targeted vulnerable residents. We can't meet real criminals on a daily basis in a small town, so they manufacture them, he explained. They plant drugs, falsify reports, strong-arm confessions. Everyone's complicit or terrified. If you speak out, you lose your job, or worse. He provided names, times, places. Carla diligently recorded every detail, her face growing increasingly grim. This aligns perfectly with the video, she said. I'll expedite the request for federal intervention. Between your testimony and the footage, we have more than enough probable cause. Andrea, arms crossed, tried to maintain composure. At last, something felt like progress. This was the missing piece, the living witness. What about Henry's safety? She pressed Carla. Carla nodded. I'll request immediate protective status from the DOJ. In the meantime, we'll stash him somewhere safe. I know a judge in the next county over who's not in Brolin's pocket. Maybe we can get a protective order signed. It felt like the first real glimmer of unstoppable momentum. Sam placed a hand on Henry's shoulder. You won't regret this, he said earnestly, though they both knew it might cost Henry everything. They parted ways. Carla arranged for Henry to stay in a safe house under the watch of an off-duty guard she trusted. Sam returned to finalize the article, now with quotes from a named police officer which would add immense credibility. Andrea drove home, adrenaline and relief mingling in her veins. She knew the endgame was near, but also that the most dangerous moment often comes when the enemy realizes they're cornered. It proved true that very night. She was awakened around 2 a.m. by pounding on her door. Heart lurching, she scrambled out of bed, grabbing her phone. Through the peephole, she saw a squad of uniformed officers on her porch. Colleran's mustached scowl was unmistakable. Her pulse thundered. "Open up, Andrea King!" Colleran bellowed, fist slamming the door again. "We have a warrant for your arrest!" She reeled, breath catching. "A warrant? On what grounds?" She flicked on the porch light. Through the tiny glass window, she saw Colleran wave a paper. "Don't make this difficult. You're aiding a criminal. We know you have an officer in your custody." Andrea swallowed, phone trembling in her grip. She dialed Carla, no immediate response. She left a frantic voicemail. "They're here, trying to arrest me on bogus charges." Then she realized she might need to stall. She inhaled deeply. "May I see the warrant?" she called out through the door. "Slide it under, please." "You'll see it when we bring you in," Colleran snarled. "This is your last chance to open up peacefully." She noticed a second cop aiming something at the lock. Fear hammered inside her skull. They were prepared to break in. Another overseas memory flashed in her mind. Enemy fighters forcing entry, a swirl of chaos. But she was determined not to go quietly, if it meant disappearing into their custody without the outside world knowing. She typed a quick text to Sam's phone. "PD at my door. They have a bogus warrant, possibly to force me to reveal Henry. Help." Colleran's voice grew sharper. Andrea King stepped away from the door, were entering by force. She had seconds to decide. If they took her, who knew what accident might happen in custody? She rummaged for her car keys, cursing under her breath. Then she realized a direct confrontation was unwinnable. She needed a plan B. Her cottage had a back door leading to an alley. She could try to slip away. Crack! She heard the front door splinter as they rammed it. She bolted through the hallway, throwing open the back door, sprinting into the darkness. Shouts erupted behind her. A flashlight beam swept overhead. She zigzagged between neighboring houses, trying to move with stealth despite her throbbing leg. She could hear them crashing through her cottage, cursing when they realized she was gone. She reached the alley, slipping behind a tall fence. Headlights swept the intersecting street. A second squad car was cruising by, presumably cutting off her escape. She held her breath, flattening herself against the fence. The car passed slowly, presumably not expecting her to be so close. She exhaled in shallow bursts, mind racing. She had to get to Carla or Sam or anyone who could help. She couldn't outrun them in a direct chase. She needed to outmaneuver them. In the gloom, she spotted an older sedan, no police markings, parked near the alley's mouth. She recognized it as belonging to an acquaintance from the community center. The owner had once mentioned leaving the keys under the seat because the car was such a junker, no one would steal it. Praying that was still true, she crept forward. Her heart hammered in her ears as she tested the door handle. It opened. She reached beneath the seat, fingers fumbling, until she found keys. Talk about a miracle. She slid into the driver's seat, ignoring her guilt at effectively borrowing the vehicle. She'd return it once safe. The engine coughed to life, headlights off, and she inched out of the alley, scanning for squads. At the next intersection, she flicked on the lights for safety, but kept them dim, turning away from downtown. Her phone vibrated with an incoming text from Sam. "Holy hell," I heard. "Carla's contacting a federal contact. They might intervene. Just get out." That was exactly what she planned to do. Andrea clenched her teeth, navigating side streets until she hit the highway leading out of town. She glanced at the mirror, half expecting sirens. The highway was mostly deserted. Once she was miles from the town border, she finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. Her chest felt tight, tears threatening to surface from the sheer terror of nearly being ambushed. She recognized the surge of post-adrenaline shakes. She forced them down, focusing on the road. She recalled a motel by the next county line, the Sunset Inn, a modest place where traveling fishermen sometimes stayed. She decided to hole up there. She needed a place to regroup, to coordinate with Carla. Maybe the federal marshals or FBI could keep her from being snatched by the local force. She couldn't believe she had to go on the run in her own country, from her own police. It was an outrage she couldn't dwell on now. Survival was first. She arrived at the Sunset Inn, parking at the far end under a flickering lamp. The night manager was half asleep, but roused enough to hand over a room key after Andrea paid in cash. She used a false name, an old tactic from her army days, forging plausible identity. Once in the room, she bolted the door, collapsed on the bed, and inhaled the stale odor of the outdated carpet. She needed rest, but her mind refused to quiet. She texted Linda, telling her to spread the word that Andrea was safe for now. Then she texted Sam, letting him know the motel location. He replied that Carla had reached some contacts at the DOJ and they were appalled by the local department's actions. "They'll move fast," Sam wrote. "Hang in there." Andrea forced her eyes shut, dog tags pressed against her chest. A wave of exhaustion crashed over her. She thought of all the innocent people who had no place to run, stuck in that corrupted town. Tomorrow, she told herself. Tomorrow we break them wide open. When she woke, the morning sun glared through dusty curtains. She checked her phone. A flurry of messages from Sam. "FBI en route. Agents from the state capitol coming. Warrant for your arrest might be void soon. Hang tight." Another from Carla. "Working with federal judge to get a protective order for you and Henry. Could be resolved in next 48 hours. Andrea's tension eased slightly. Reinforcements were coming. The cavalry, as one might say. She flicked on the motel's TV, a local news channel, only to freeze at the headline. Local resident Andrea King wanted for questioning in alleged conspiracy. A serious-looking anchor read off what was clearly a police press release, describing Andrea as armed and dangerous. She almost laughed at the blatant lies. The broadcast ended by encouraging citizens to call 911 if they spotted her. So that was their tactic. Paint her as a criminal. She recognized disinformation from her tours overseas. The difference now was that it was happening in her home state. Her phone rang. It was Sam. Big news, he said excitedly. State investigators plus 2 FBI agents just arrived at the Seabourne police station. They're demanding to see the chief, reviewing logs. We're hearing rumors that multiple cops are already trying to shred documents or flee. The local DA is panicking. They're telling the officers to stand down. I think the chief is barricading himself in his office with a handful of loyalists. There's talk of a standoff. Andrea's heart soared. So it's happening. It's really happening. Yes, and I want you to be safe. Don't come back yet. Wait for Carla to finalize your protection. But once the feds secure the station, you'll be free to return and give your statement. Relief mixed with disbelief. Could it all unravel that fast once higher authorities stepped in? She hoped the rot was contained enough that these federal agents wouldn't be compromised. Thanks, Sam. Keep me posted. She waited in the motel room, pacing the threadbare carpet. Hours dragged on. The midday sun gave way to late afternoon. Then Carla texted. Chief Brolin took Colleran and a few officers out a back door, possibly fleeing. Agents in pursuit. We have Henry with us, giving official testimony. Please remain hidden for now. Andrea paced, flipping between channels on the motel TV, but no station had immediate coverage. She scrolled social media. Locals posted phone clips of black SUVs around the station, officers in plainclothes ushering detainees out. One short video even showed a man in a police uniform being handcuffed by a federal agent. The text overlay read, OMG, it's happening. Free New Seabourne. By evening, Sam called again, breathless with excitement. They're all going down, Andrea. The State Attorney General's office is filing multiple charges: civil rights violations, falsifying evidence, assault, widespread corruption. They're also releasing your name from their wanted list, officially cleared. They found no evidence to support any charges. The feds want you to come in voluntarily to give your testimony. Confirm the videos. Tears pricked at her eyes. She sank onto the motel bed. We did it, she whispered, almost afraid to believe it. What about the chief and Colleran? Sam's tone darkened. Colleran was arrested after a short chase on the highway. The chief is rumored to be trying to cut a deal, but the AG has no sympathy. They uncovered so much evidence of wrongdoing. There's no way he's escaping prison. Andrea exhaled. I'll head back then. Maybe tomorrow. Let's coordinate with Carla so I can testify safely. I want everything done by the book. Of course, Sam said. Andrea? Thank you. The whole town owes you. She ended the call, took a moment to let the relief wash over her, and then prepared for the drive home. She felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Despite the threats, the bullet-laced glove, the near arrest, she had persevered. A part of her still braced for some final twist, but the knowledge that the FBI and state agents were physically on the ground in New Seabourne gave her confidence. This was no longer a local matter. The eyes of higher authorities were upon them. Returning in the borrowed sedan, she beheld the town with fresh eyes. It looked the same coastline, same modest houses. But the atmosphere felt different, an electric sense of possibility instead of dread. Word traveled fast in small communities, and she noticed groups of neighbors gathered on porches, talking animatedly. Some waved in recognition as she passed. She realized that by now they likely knew she'd been falsely targeted. She was no longer a fugitive, but a hero who'd pulled back the curtain on tyranny. She parked near the community center, stepping out carefully, scanning the street. No ominous cruisers lurked. Instead, a handful of unfamiliar black SUVs, presumably federal vehicles, sat near the curb. She spotted Linda Poe rushing out the door. Upon seeing Andrea, Linda burst into grateful tears and pulled her into a hug. You did it! They're free! The ones they arrested in that sweep. They're releasing them now. The station's being purged. They found hidden files, a stash of drugs they used for framing. Andrea swallowed around a lump in her throat. I'm just glad the truth came out, she managed. People can finally breathe. News outlets from the city are on their way, Linda added, wiping her tears. They want to interview the folks who were targeted. They want to interview you, too. Andrea nodded, though she felt a wave of exhaustion. She'd talk to them if it meant shining a spotlight on injustice. She followed Linda inside, where she found Carla, Sam, and a couple of state investigators going over reams of paperwork. Carla rushed to Andrea, grabbing her hands. "Glad you're safe," she said. "We've got an official request for your statement. Let's get it done." The statement process took hours, as Andrea recounted her experiences from the moment she arrived in New Seabourne, the intimidation by Colleran, the evidence from the USB, her contact with the whistleblower, the attempted arrest. The investigators listened intently, occasionally glancing at each other when new details corroborated Henry's testimony or the video footage. Andrea felt a sense of grim satisfaction seeing them nod and take notes. This was how justice was supposed to function, transparently, with accountability. At last she was free to go, stepping outside the community center into a humid night. She gazed up at the stars, heart clenching with relief. Sam joined her, clasping her shoulder. "Media's out front wanting a quote. You up for it?" She closed her eyes, letting the breeze wash over her face. She recalled war zones where the only press coverage came from embedded journalists, sometimes ignoring local tragedies. Now the press wanted her story. "Yes," she said softly. "I'll do it, but just a few minutes, I'm exhausted." They walked around the building to find a small throng of reporters with cameras and microphones. Lights flashed. A microphone was thrust at her face. "Miss King, is it true you uncovered massive corruption? Could you comment on what made you take such a dangerous stand?" Andrea took a deep breath. She clutched her dog tags, letting them jingle as a reminder of her convictions. She spoke calmly, passionately, about how she simply did what any citizen or soldier should do when confronted with injustice. She explained the importance of evidence and collective courage. She refused to name the whistleblower to protect him, but she praised all who spoke out, particularly the victims who risked more abuse by sharing their stories. Her voice wavered only when she described the feeling of being hunted in her own hometown. "I served overseas," she said, "believing I was defending the freedoms we hold dear. I never expected to fight such a similar battle here. Yet the principle remains the same. If those in power abuse their authority, we must stand against them, no matter the cost." A hush fell among the reporters. One of them, an older journalist with kind eyes, offered quietly, "This must have been very hard for you." Andrea nodded, tears brimming. "It was. But it's harder for those who've suffered silently for years under this regime. Now, hopefully, they can start to heal." A gentle applause rose from a few bystanders who had gathered. Cameras flashed again. Andrea felt her cheeks flush, not in vanity, but in the raw mix of relief and heartbreak. She'd never sought fame or accolades, just the chance to live in a community free from oppression. When the questioning ended, Sam guided her away, whispering, "I think that's enough. Let's get you some rest." She murmured thanks and turned to see Linda approaching with half a dozen townspeople, some smiling through tears. They expressed gratitude, offered hugs. The teen from the gas station ran up, eyes shining, exclaiming that he no longer felt terrified going to work. An elderly couple clasped her hands, voice quavering, "You saved us from leaving this place." Andrea felt overwhelmed, a sense of purpose reaffirmed. The following days saw a whirlwind of federal investigations, arrests, public statements. The mayor, who had turned a blind eye, quickly resigned. The city council promised sweeping reforms. Officer Henry, under federal protection, revealed in deeper detail how far the corruption extended. He testified in preliminary hearings that placed Chief Brolin and Colleran at the center of the entire operation. Multiple local judges and council members were implicated in covering up complaints. The community breathed a collective sigh of relief as one corrupt figure after another was led away in cuffs. Andrea spent that time quietly rebuilding her life. She replaced her broken front door, patched up the damage from the night Colleran tried to arrest her, and tried to find normalcy. She accepted local help to fix her slashed tires. Everywhere she went, people recognized her face. Though she was grateful for their appreciation, she remained humble, telling them the real heroes were the whistleblowers and the community that refused to be silenced. The Department of Justice appointed an interim official to oversee the new Seabourne Police Department while they restructured the command. Younger, honest officers who had been sidelined now had a chance to step up, supervised by federal monitors. Henry, though forced to testify against his peers, found solace that he did the right thing. Eventually, with the support of his family, he decided to transfer to a different department in another region, hoping for a fresh start. One late afternoon, Linda invited Andrea to speak at the community center. A broad range of residents showed up, from teens to grandparents, wanting to hear from the woman whose actions helped ignite the purging of corruption. As Andrea stood behind a makeshift podium, her dog tags glinting in the overhead lights, she felt a surge of both pride and humility. She told them that the hardest battles often aren't fought on foreign soil, but right where we live, in the daily struggles against those who misuse power. She reminded them that unity and shared courage can topple even the most entrenched authorities. Her voice cracked when she quoted a line often heard among older generations. "We do not bend the knee to fear, for if we do, we lose more than our freedom. We lose our soul." Applause erupted, heartfelt and long-lasting. Middle-aged folks who had grown up with such sayings nodded fervently, tears shining. A journalist approached her afterward, requesting a final interview. "What do you hope people take away from this?" he asked. Andrea paused, looking around at the men and women who'd gathered. Some were bruised by the system, others just relieved it was over. She recalled the camaraderie of her squad overseas, how they always believed in leaving no one behind. "I hope they remember that justice matters," she said quietly, "and that when we stand up for each other, when we speak out against corruption, our collective voice can echo louder than any bully's threats. It's like a quote my own father used to tell me when I was little, 'The darkest hour is just before the dawn.' We proved that dawn comes if you hold on." That night she returned to her cottage with a sense of closure. The front door had been replaced. The bullet-laced glove and threats were now evidence in an official case. Her life, while still tinted by the echoes of her experience, felt aligned with the ideals she'd fought for in the army. She had protected the Constitution, all right, protected it from those who wore badges but trampled the laws they were sworn to uphold. Over the following months, the transformation of New Seabourne was profound. Federal monitors ensured that the newly appointed interim chief followed strict guidelines. Officers with a record of abuse were dismissed or prosecuted. Younger recruits, guided by a moral code rather than intimidation tactics, joined the force. Citizen oversight committees formed, ensuring future transparency. Public trust, though wounded, began a slow recovery. Andrea busied herself volunteering at the community center and occasionally lending an ear to people still processing their trauma. She used her leadership skills from the Army to help set up neighborhood watch groups that worked in partnership with the reformed police department. One day, she found Linda painting over a graffiti-laced wall, brightening it with a mural depicting community unity, smiling children, interlocked hands of diverse neighbors, and a shining sun over the sea. The old gloom that once reigned in these streets was gradually replaced by an undercurrent of hope. Whenever Andrea walked around town, she wore her dog tags visibly. They were no longer just symbols of her military service. They had become a quiet testament that she stood for justice here too. Residents often stopped her to say hello, share updates, or simply express gratitude. She responded with warmth, though she never let the gratitude overshadow the memory of those who suffered. She visited some in the hospital or in recovery, listening to their stories of how fear had once ruled. She reminded them that they owned the future now, not the bullies in uniform. As the trials began, Chief Brolin Colleran and several co-conspirators faced extensive charges: civil rights violations, racketeering, evidence tampering, assault. They each tried to shift blame, but the evidence was overwhelming. In a dramatic court session, Henry took the stand to confirm every detail. Andrea also testified, describing her encounters and the times the department tried to frame her. The jury delivered unanimous guilty verdicts. Sentencing was harsh, reflecting the gravity of betraying public trust. The final blow came when federal judges demanded restitution funds for those unlawfully arrested, forcibly evicted, or otherwise harmed. Justice, as slow and fragile as it sometimes is, had come to New Seabourne. When asked by a national news reporter what lessons she felt were most vital, Andrea smiled sadly. "We must always remember that justice requires more than just laws on paper. It needs people willing to enforce those laws fairly, and citizens unafraid to challenge those who abuse power." As Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." That applies to small coastal towns as much as anywhere else. Middle-aged viewers watching from their living rooms nodded in agreement, recalling the civil rights movements of decades past, reminded that vigilance is an ongoing duty. On the one-year anniversary of the scandal's public unveiling, the new police chief, an outsider appointed by state authorities, organized a dedication ceremony at the community center. They unveiled a plaque honoring those who stood against corruption, naming Andrea King, Sam Bowers, Linda Poe, and others who risked everything to protect the vulnerable. It moved Andrea to tears, especially seeing that the final line read, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it." Life pressed on. Sam's article had expanded into a special investigative series recognized by larger outlets. Linda's community programs received grants to help rebuild trust between residents and law enforcement. Carla Monroe took on similar cases in other towns, using the success in New Seabourne as a model for federal-state collaboration against police corruption. And Andrea, after much deliberation, accepted an offer to serve as a civilian liaison for the newly formed Police Oversight Committee. She wanted to ensure the reform stuck, that no shadowy figure would ever again pin threatening notes to doors in the dead of night. On quieter days, she would stroll along the shore, letting the sea breeze ruffle her hair. Sometimes she'd recall the bullet-laced glove, or the frantic run from her home. Other times, the image of a battered teen or an old man trembling under Coleran's glare surfaced in her mind, fueling her resolve to never let down her guard entirely. But mostly she allowed herself to savor the lull of waves. She had survived another kind of war, and had won, not with a rifle, but with moral fortitude and community unity. One mild afternoon, Linda and Sam joined her on a walk by the water. They chatted about the future, about the possibility of new businesses returning to town now that the environment felt safer. Sam teased Andrea about running for local office, to which she gave a hearty laugh. "I'm more comfortable in camouflage than a suit," she joked. But the idea lingered in the back of her mind. Maybe she could do more. Yet for the moment she valued the peace of being an everyday citizen, living among friends who no longer cowered in fear. That evening, while finishing a cup of tea at her little cottage, Andrea flicked on the local news. A short segment aired on the continuing transformation of the New Seabourne Police Department, highlighting community policing efforts and a new hotline for residents to report any misconduct anonymously. The reporter ended with a note of optimism, stating the town's revival was a testament to ordinary people standing up for what's right. Andrea sipped her tea, letting a faint smile touch her lips. She pictured the day she first came back, the dread that permeated the place. Now the energy was different, hopeful, determined. People had found their voices, discovered solidarity. Reflecting on everything that had happened, she realized she'd lived 2 wars in her lifetime, one on foreign soil, the other in her own hometown. Both demanded the willingness to risk personal safety for a larger principle. She rose, heading to her front porch. The sunset painted the sky in fiery oranges and soft pinks. She ran her fingers along the newly replaced porch railing, free of bullet-laced warnings or ominous notes. Life felt lighter. She pressed her palm to the dog tags at her chest, breathing in the brisk coastal air, whispering a small prayer of gratitude for the second chance her community had gained. Lessons learned? She thought of the greater truths that might resonate with folks who'd watched from afar. The most profound of them all, she decided, was that each individual has a responsibility to confront injustice. Courage isn't about being fearless. It's about taking action despite fear. Another lesson was that power, when unchecked, can corrode even the institutions meant to protect us. Transparency, accountability, and honest communication are the pillars that keep democracy alive. If these pillars crack, tyranny can creep in, unnoticed at first, until it becomes a raging infestation. She remembered a quote that an older sergeant had once shared with her overseas: "Evil triumphs when good people do nothing." It was a phrase often repeated, almost cliché, but all too true. She had witnessed it here. Complacency had let the corruption thrive, but the moment enough people said no more, the house of cards collapsed. Finishing her tea, she watched the sun slip beneath the horizon, feeling a calm she hadn't known in a very long time. Tomorrow there would still be battles to fight, systemic problems to address, trauma to heal, but at least now the war was out in the open, fought with truths and laws, not hidden behind badges and threats. That was victory enough for her to finally sleep soundly. And so the story of New Seabourne became a testament to the human spirit's capacity for resistance, especially in the face of oppression by those sworn to protect. For Andrea King, the soldier who thought her days of combat were over, it was a reminder that life's greatest fights aren't always waged on distant battlefields. Sometimes the call to defend freedom comes from your very own front porch. In answering that call, she found purpose anew, forging deeper bonds with neighbors who once lived in fear. Together, they redefined what law and order should mean, protecting the weak, honoring the truth, and standing as a collective shield against those who would sow terror for personal gain. Such was the turning of the tide in New Seabourne, where broken windows and broken spirits began to mend side by side, and the smell of the ocean came to symbolize the promise of renewal. And if any traveler passing through asked for the story of how this sleepy seaside town conquered its darkest hour, the residents would tell them about Andrea King, the dog tags she wore, the bullet-laced gloves tossed at her feet, and how she and the community rose hand in hand to cast out the shadows that had long haunted their streets. They would share a final reflection, one especially cherished by those in their middle years, who'd seen life's cycles of struggle and triumph. No one can do everything, but everyone can do something. When we combine those somethings, we create a force even the corrupt can't silence. And that, in essence, was the enduring legacy left by a veteran who refused to bow down, a journalist who refused to be quiet, an officer who refused to follow unjust orders, and a town that found its voice. In the end, it wasn't the might of a single hero that restored justice, but the unity of many hearts determined to reclaim their home. And from that unity blossomed a hope as boundless as the ocean they lived beside, reminding them each dawn that indeed the darkest hour is just before the light. Valuable lessons and philosophical insights for the audience. True courage requires action. It's not the absence of fear that makes someone courageous, but the decision to act in spite of it. We often wait for a mythical hero to fix our problems, but real change starts when ordinary people rise up. Injustice anywhere is a threat everywhere. We often think serious corruption or tyranny happens only in big, faraway places. Yet Andrea's struggle proves oppression can exist in small towns too, and ignoring it endangers everyone's rights. Community is stronger united than divided. When faced with intimidation, we often feel alone. But as soon as we stand together, share evidence, and speak with one voice, we become a force that even the most entrenched power can't easily silence. Transparency and accountability safeguard freedom. Systems of oversight, journalists, honest officers, engaged citizens are crucial. When any part of this chain fails, corruption can spread. Vigilance is a lifelong duty. Redemption and second chances. Officer Henry reminds us that it's never too late to do the right thing. A system may seem all-powerful, but individuals within can break the chain of wrongdoing, especially with community support. The power of hope. Despite threats and violence, Andrea and the town believed that justice could prevail. This faith in a brighter tomorrow kept them pushing forward, echoing that timeless wisdom, "The darkest hour is just before the dawn." These lessons speak directly to our human experience, resonating especially with those in middle age who have lived through enough to appreciate how precious and fragile our freedoms truly are.